All right, I'm gonna share my screen quickly and get over to. It did not. Let me get my other. It's not wanting to pick it up. Bear with me just a minute. My internet has been really used up. Pull up here. Okay, now business now. Let me hit it. Here we go. All right, there it goes. It should pop up on your end. Can you see it? We got a slide deck popped up. Okay. So really kind of getting in 4 and 5, they're kind of connected there on in the modules. And I wanted to share this slide deck because we're now really getting into the norm reference. So this slide deck has a lot of good information. I just wanted to kind of go over each thing a little bit of it. Breaks down what norm reference tests are and some of the components. So um, basically, when you're looking at norm reference, we're looking at comparing the student's score with a group of other students that are very similar as socioeconomic status, age, um, a lot of factors there. So basically, it's created for a specific domain. So when we look at norm reference test, we have an item pool that's created that your students, we also look at developmental versions of that test as well. And so when they're building these and making these various assessments, they do a lot of small sampling and field testing to make sure that they are valid and reliable before they are actually put out there. So there's a lot of steps that take place before it's actually out there on the market and it's used and accessible by schools. So there's a lot of revisions, a lot of field sampling, and a lot of field testing that has taken place. So really, we look at what is norm reference. What is the norm reference test? So basically, your norm group is a sample, is a group of diverse students. And the diversity is looking at linguistic diversity, disabilities, cultural. There's several components that's taken into that. And so basically that normed group, Debbie, that big norm group, they set the average performance for that particular assessment or assessments that are given. So I always refer to the WJ4. Okay, so there's two major assessments, components to that. You have the cognitive and you have the academic side, and within each one of them, they are comprised of multiple subtests. So those have been tested multiple times in sample groups. Also, your norm group should be representative of students who are going to be assessed later. And also students who are later assessed should be similar in background, age, and grade level. So a lot of times it talks about, or we see on there, uh, it talks a little bit about interpolating data. And so the developers of the test, they obtain what we call an average expected score. And that is reflected in those comprehensive reports. And I was just kind of explaining that to Kenna when I told her, hey, I'll provide you that comprehensive report. We'll go over it. Debbie, you'll see that when you sit down with your psych. In the back part of it, where all the statistical data is, it'll show the predicted score for that student, and then there'll be another column and it shows what they actually scored, and it's going to show a discrepancy whether they scored above or below, and how much above or how much below it was. And
I'm
so that
excited to talk, sorry, but
no,
I'm
you're good.
excited to talk to my psych because she writes some of the norms for these tests.
Hmm. Yeah,
She
definitely.
helps them write those norms. So I'm excited to talk to her to see how that works.
Yeah, exactly. It's a process. I'm sure she's going to tell you it's a pretty extensive process. So,
Oh.
So that's one, they come up with what they consider expected scores for that student based on their grade level, based on their age. Okay. And then they also will put those scores in decimal form as well. So you're going to see a
Right.
lot of a numeric representation in those reports when you sit down with her, Debbie, and she starts showing you what that looks. Also, scores may be divided by age group so that each month a chronological age is represented. So it's going to be a category out there showing the student's age that's going to be expressed in years, months, and date. Okay. A lot of times at the header on the introductory page of our report, it will have that student's chronological age represented in years, months, and days as of the day we're testing them.
Right.
Okay, it's going to say Johnny Joe is 10 years, 9 months, 14 days. And that was as of that day that I came in and assessed them. Okay. Scores are going to be used with are going to be written using a dash. So it may say 12-2. Okay, that could be if it's age equivalency, it's going to be 12 years, 2 months. If it's grade level equivalency, it's going to be 12th grade, second month. Okay, so you'll see some of that. Hey, when we administer those, we have to follow really, you have to follow a lot of strict protocols, Debbie, and I'm sure she's going to go over that with you as well. Particular manuals, we have to follow a specific protocol and steps when we are administering that, so we can make sure that validity and reliability is good. We also have to have a good testing environment that's positive. It's also good for us as an administrator of those tests to make sure that we have had plenty of practice administering those. We don't want to just acquire a new test that's maybe we're not familiar with and then just go right, jump in and start using it immediately. Okay. So to keep that reliability and validity, we've had, excuse me, practice administering that. Hey, some other things, try to get us familiar with that student before the test begins. Try to get engaged in some friendly conversation, explain why you're doing the testing, give a little brief introduction to the test, and just try to present a calm manner. A lot of that makes a big difference. Okay, talked about their chronological age. A lot of times you'll see this at the header or the front page of those reports. So this kind of explains the process of how to do it by hand. Okay. For all the assessments, these normed assessments, and if you're an examiner coming in, we plug in their information and the software does calculation for us. Okay. Thankfully. But when you go through the programs on to acquire the certification and credentialing to do it, a lot of your programs, whether it's a psychometry program or school psychologist, as you're learning to do these assessments, a lot of times they will make you do a lot of the calculations by hand, just like this, doing the chronological ages. Then when you're going through and doing the norming and scoring to make sure that you have a true understanding of that process. Okay. So again, we talk about chronological age. So on the test date, for this particular example, the student was 8 years old, 5 months, 24 days. But here it shows the process and how we do that. Debbie, do you have a question?
No, I was just saying, and then you rounded up to the 8.6.
Yeah,
Sorry.
you rounded up. Yeah, no, you're good. Yeah, and then you rounded up. So we would
Because it's
round it up.
over the 15-day mark.
Yeah, there you go, round it up. So that's kind of how you go through there and calculate that. Okay. A lot of times when we're given those tests, and I'm going through and scoring that, and there's 30 items on there, and I'm going through and determining basals and ceilings and doing all that. The number I record on my protocol down here is actually going to be the raw score. And then I take that raw score and it's plugged into my software and it's ran through the norming deal to come up with the standard score. So it is a process. Literally, your raw score is the number of items that the student answered correctly out of a specific set of questions. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. Basals and ceilings, you heard me mention that.
Hmm.
Everybody familiar, you guys familiar with the basals and ceiling?
After I read the chapter, I am.
Yeah. So I remember going through the program and I'm like, what are they talking about? But it makes sense after you
It
kind of
did.
read it, then you get to practice that. So certain subtests that I give, you have the basal and then the ceiling. They reach the ceiling if they score X number incorrect in a row. So if they
Right.
score or they miss 5 consecutive
Okay.
problems in a row, or they miss 4, depending on what the protocol is, you stop the test immediately. We're done. We're moving on to the next one. Okay. Basal is kind of the starting point, depending on
Mhm.
some of the subtests. If Debbie, let's say I'm coming in to test you, and let's just say you're in 7th grade, and I look on there at your grade level, age level, and there's 60 problems on the subtest, but due to your ability level, due to your age or grade level, it tells me that you are supposed to start on number 15.
Okay. Yeah.
That's where I start you at. So problem 1 through 14 is automatically scored correct. And I'll go from there. Now, let's say I start at 15 and I indicate that on my protocols when we move forward, and the ceiling on that's 4, and Debbie hits it right off the bat, her first 4 problems, I stop the test. So when I go to score that, problems 1 through 14 is correct. So her raw score on that's 14. I record it.
Oh, okay.
Started her on 15, she missed it. 16, she missed it. 17, she missed it. 18, she missed it. We hit the ceiling, I stop it. We move on. That makes sense? So not all of the subtests are like that, but there are some in there. Okay, so that's kind of how that works. And in each one of the basal and ceilings is going to change depending on the age grade level of the student. Okay, when you do these for an adult, sometimes I may be called in to test someone that's getting ready to start transitional services and like vocational rehabilitation services getting ready to take over. And they may want a current up-to-date assessment of that individual. So they kind of know where to take it from there. So if that individual is 18, 19 years old, they may have me start them on, problem number 25, maybe the basal starting point. Okay. All right, next thing is protocols. Basically, that's the form that we're using to administer and for scoring. So Debbie, your person you're going to meet with, she may, for this particular student, she may pull out the protocol, I call it the protocol booklets or the testing booklets. And a lot of times it's like the old achievement test booklet that students have. And so it's got all the scoring guides, and we're going to go through that. And a lot of times when we're scoring them, I'm going you'll see a series of ones and zeros. So ones, when I put a 1 by it, that means it's correct. When I put a 0 by it, it's incorrect. So when you go and look, I'm going to count up how many ones on that subtest. And once I count them up, that's my raw score. Okay. So that's what we have is the protocols or the testing manuals. Okay. Here's some examples on getting best results. Okay, just trying to create a good, comfortable testing environment, making the student feel at ease, making sure that we follow the exact protocols, so we get a good reading on them. We can't go in and reinforce some of their answers and all that. So we really um, there's not a lot that we can do to encourage a student really, other than just, hey, you're working hard for me, doing a good job. That's about it. Okay, so we really have to make sure we follow the direction. So it's pretty strict on what we can and can't do. Okay, reducing bias. So we also have to take into consideration when we come in there. Is there any communication impairments? Is there any hearing impairments? Do we need to look at um, any of the materials that we're using or the methods of responding? Does it limit students from responding to us and giving us answers and feedback? Does the student's background experiences limit their ability to respond. So there's a lot of things that we have to take into consideration. Okay. Is the examiner familiar to the student? Are the instructions explained in a familiar, easy to understand fashion? Okay, are we making sure that they truly understand what we're asking for them? Is the recording technique required of the student on the test familiar? Okay, so if we got to go in and have record some of their answers. So some of the subtests on the WJ4, they're going to have to give us samples of their writing, written responses. Okay, so we have to make sure that they are familiar with that and that they understand, because they are going to provide some things like that for us as part of the testing process. Scores that we get, a lot of different ways to um, divide the data as far as scoring. Okay, and I have a chart on here. It's going to kind of give you an example of that, but the very basic is the raw score. Okay, number correct out of a given set. Okay, are there any advantages and disadvantages to using different types of derived scores? So again, I'm going to show you a chart in just a moment that has a lot of different types of scores. Z scores, T scores are just two different types. Don't necessarily see them a lot. Certain assessments use them in their reporting, others don't. Okay, so trying to understand and compare, T score to Z score and trying to convert those. There is a conversion process. So here are some different types of scores that we see in those comprehensive reports. I mentioned a standard score. So when we're looking at standard scores, the average is 100. So if you look at the bell curve and you got your from your left side going to the right, 0, 100 is going to be in the middle, the mean, that's the average. And then you go the further to the right you go, the number goes up. Okay. Then in that bell curve, we have it divided, sliced into sections. All right. So that standard score is average. When we look at a T score, 50 is average. So if we had the bell curve and everything, the mean right there in the middle, median, it's 50. Okay. And the standard deviation is 10. Then we have Z scores and we have Stanine scores. We have a scaled score, percentile rank. Okay, how the student performed in relationship to students in the norm sample of the same major group. Okay, so when we're going in and building our reports in that software, it gives us the ability, if we want, to go ahead and include all of those. But personally, when I go in and do my reports, a lot of times I will go in and leave out T scores and C scores. Stanine's not, that's not as familiar. Sometimes I'll include the skill score, but a lot of times I'm looking at percentile rank, standard score, age equivalent, and grade equivalent. Those are the common ones. Okay. Percentile rank. Okay. So, Kenneth, we said, let's say I tested you and you scored at the 52nd percentile. Okay. You scored better to or greater than 52% of the students in the norm group that's of the same age or same grade level. Okay. 52nd percentile or the 60th percentile rank. Age equivalent. So I mentioned on these reports, it'll show predicted score, and it could be in an age equivalency or it could be in a grade equivalency. So, Kenna, for that same, or maybe you scored the 52nd percentile rank, your age equivalency on that, the day of the test, you're actually 15 years, 5 months, and 16 days. I'm just throwing that out there. On that particular subtest, your age equivalency is, say you scored 19 and so many months and all that. So you scored well above what your actual chronological age is. Same thing with grade equivalency. On that same subtest, You're currently in the 10th grade, 5th month, but your score was 21, 5th month. So that's post college. I mean, you scored well above. And so if we are depicting that in standard score and we put that on a bell curve, that particular one, and we're going to plot it, it's going to be pretty high on the bell curve, right? You scored well above average. So different ways to present those scores. Okay. A lot of times, too, I like to include that age and grade equivalency because that's an easy way for the parent to really see where their students at, whether they scored well above or well below. That's an easy identifier for them compared to some of these other types of scores. So if little Johnny's in the 5th grade and I'm in explaining that subtest, and let's say little Johnny scored first grade 7th month, that gives you an indicator that Johnny's really low, extremely low, several grade levels low. And so just kind of helps that parents kind of understand because they're getting a lot of information thrown at them. Okay. Hey, group testing. All right. So when we're doing norm reference testing, a lot of times, especially for the purpose of qualifying for special services, we don't ever do it in a group. Okay. It's always a one-on-one with the evaluator. But there are standardized tests that are given in groups. We often refer to those as high stakes, right? State testing. You guys are all getting ready to do that right now, or just right in the middle of it. Okay, those are standardized tests. Okay, high stakes, all states do them. Okay, it's not, we can give that type of test in a group. We do it all the time, right? In school for state testing. But for a norm, for the purposes of qualifying for special services, we want to do that. We want to make sure we get them in a good, comfortable, controlled environment. The only ones in there free of interruptions is going to be the examiner and the student. Okay. One thing you want to remember too, make sure tests are logical and serve the purpose they were intended for. Okay. No single test has the ability to answer all achievement questions that we're trying to get data on. Okay. Here's some things, just National Center on Educational Outcomes, just some of their core principles when it comes to testing, uh, ways that it's reported, ways that assessment data is used for. A lot of times on high stakes testing, they use that data to hold schools accountable, right, for their learning. That's why we have to do state tests. A lot of times now, states have a report card, school report card that's reflective upon the performance of your school. Unfortunately, that's the data that's going in the report card, and you think about, okay, how many kids are not very good test takers, or is that a true reflection on that one given day of their overall academic ability? So those are things you have to think about. Assessments also allow students to show their knowledge, skills on challenging content. Also, there's a lot of times there's high quality decision making that determines how students may participate. Also, we're using the data collected from that to make decisions that may guide our instruction. Okay. So those are just a few of the guiding principles on assessment that are taken into account. Okay, we look at high stakes considerations, IDA. Okay, it's used for accountability, also gauging student progress to determine programs they're in are effective. So we go in and reevaluate them too after they've been in special services for a while. Okay, also for IDA, we can afford accommodations, maybe changing a format or how they respond, could be their setting or the timing of scheduling. We just cannot change what the test is actually meant to measure. Okay. We can get some accommodations for the setting or the time, but we don't alter what the test was intended to measure. Okay. High stakes test considerations. One thing that we have to look at is there is and I don't know if you guys are familiar with this or not. I was just sitting in a meeting with our director the other day, and this was something that came out. Um, and we had concerns because we have a lot of referrals, a lot of students being tested. Our numbers are high, but there's a 1% cap on the number of students who may take alternative assessments under IDA. Okay. I don't know if your district's concerned about that or if your numbers are getting up there on students that
Is that
may
1% in the district or per school?
that 1% per district.
Per district.
Yeah.
Oh, because
So
I know we had one student that was excused last year on state assessment
yeah. So I mean
because
that's something right now. I mean, we're right at the tipping point. That's why we were having the conversation, and we know what is being tested now and are trying to predict based on informal assessment data we've collected and everything on our end, and based on our knowledge and the predictability on whether a student's going to be placed or not, it's pretty high, and we're not good. I mean, we've got concerns about exceeding that. So, yeah, something you got to look at. Assessments that are permitted include portfolio, performance-based, authentic, and observations. Okay. So high stakes assessment. I don't know how your district looks at high stakes assessment and also how they align curriculum. I don't know if your district has a curriculum management plan where they sit down and analyze, your high stakes test and then try to come up with a curriculum management plan where they align all the curriculum based on testing. And that drives your instruction. A lot of districts, some do, some don't. It's a pretty complex process, but it's something you might want to ask and see if your district does that. So, are different issues and research and high stakes tests, concerns about inconsistency, definitions regarding high stakes tests, federal laws, and then variability among the different states, from state to state, as far as tests and what's used. I'm now talking more specifically for SPED services. Okay, so you have some states now that are looking at discrepancy based versus based on testing, and in other states that are going to like an RTI model, based on collecting that data and looking at that model to guide for placement services. So do you guys know what Kansas does by chance? Okay.
like I said, we had a student last year that did not have to take the state assessment due to, I think, more behavior than anything. But honestly, I couldn't tell you what they had to do in place of it. I didn't get
Yeah.
that far.
Okay. So the last time I looked, there's not a lot of those states that have switched to that RTI model, but I think there's still probably a majority of them that are using the discrepancy model or it's done through the testing. So definitely something you might want to look at.
I don't remember.
So when you're looking at universal design, this slide is really kind of looking at that. There's a few parts to that. And so equitable use. So looking at assessment, just making sure that it's marketable to people that has diverse abilities. Okay. Also flexibility in use. Looking at that accommodates a wide range of individual preferences and abilities. Another one is that simple use. So the use of design, it's easy to understand regardless of the user's experience or knowledge, skills. Perceptible information. So basically, the design of the assessment communicates necessary information effectively to the user. Tolerance for error, basically the design of it minimizes any hazards or adverse consequences. And then looking at low physical effort, the design can be used efficiently and comfortably with minimum fatigue on that. That's something I have to keep in mind when we're doing the assessments with the little guys, young ones, when we're testing them, is having to break that up a little bit more so they don't get fatigued. And then one of the last principles on there is size and space, making sure you have good, adequate space um, in your approach, regardless of the user's the size of the user, their posture, mobility. Just make sure you have a good, comfortable testing environment. So those are a lot of things to consider when looking at testing, especially when you get into the norm reference, because we just have to follow so many specific protocols and guidelines when we do them. So, any questions? I went over that slide deck quick, kind of get the high points. A good reference if you want to go back and look at that. Just kind of breaks down some of the just the basic foundational things when it comes to norm reference testing, high stakes test. Any questions on that? Anything I covered on it? Again, if you are working with a school psych to try to get some of the data, as they're setting down some of the things that they'll probably go over and bring up, you're like, oh yeah, that's some of the things we covered on the slide deck in class the other night. So again, as that individual, if you're working with them and they're explaining some things and you maybe don't know some of the terminology or it doesn't sound familiar to you, stop, ask them questions. So there's just a lot of information in the reports. So, okay, so moving forward, we'll talk real quick about your assignments. So you guys had the informal assessments that were just submitted. I think I've got all those pretty much scored. Remember, I need to go back and double check, but I thought I had them done as I was sitting in the airport yesterday. Um, But moving forward, getting started with the norm test and where you're at now, does anyone have any questions that I could answer for you or provide any clarifications?
No, I
No?
asked what I needed to ask. That helped.
Yeah. If, and I just mentioned this in conversation, but I'll say it on the recording so when people access this and they hear it. So if you are working with a school psychometrist or the school psychologist to get the information to help you with this assignment, and you're getting that data from them, you can get that data and then take it and build your own table, chart, or graph to display that. Okay, don't just take what they've got in the report and copy it and then put it in there. Okay, but get the data you need out of it and then think about, okay, how could I take this and put it into a table format or a chart or a graph to help display it. So if I was sitting across the table from a parent, it would help them to visualize what I'm explaining to them verbally. Okay. Like I said, when doing the assessments and we're going in there, we plug a lot of that into the software and it generates a lot of that for us. Okay. All that. It'll even generate some of the charts. I don't necessarily use those a lot. I have my own charts that I'll take and pull that data and put them in. I've got a chart that I created that's got the bell curve that shows their standard scores, and I plot all their subtest scores in there. And I kind of, when I split that bell curve, I color code it like a red, a red, an orange, a yellow, and then a green. And those are just kind of some of the different, I call them zones, and I color code them. And so when we start on the bell curve, when those I plotted those subtest scores in there, they're in that orange zone, getting closer over to the far left, approaching the red zone. Always kind of use that as a way to let parents know, hey, when we're seeing data points over there, that's kind of getting down into what I just call the danger zone, so they kind of understand, hey, when those scores are getting down that low, that's showing discrepancies, deficiencies, weaknesses in those skill sets. So anything you can do to kind of help them understand the data when you're presenting it. So Any questions you want to ask of me? So Debbie, I was able to get from 6 to 9:45 condensed into about 45, 50 minutes. So how about that? If you think of anything, like I said, so you won't have any assignment due this Sunday. Okay, so now we're in the deal where you got a couple weeks in between. So next week, when we're talking, we'll be kind of at that point. If you remember, I talked about this the very first night. We're going to, between about that fourth and fifth week, we're going to be at the point where it's going to overlap and intersect. So next week, I'm going to start talking a little bit about, hey, we need to narrow down your focus on your CBM probe and go ahead and start administering that to get your data points even though you haven't quite finished the norm report. This is where we intersect next week. If you remember, I brought that up the first night. Okay. So next week will be that time. So remember, I'll get into a little bit of that and you'll think, oh my gosh, this guy's running off and leaving us. No, that's going to be the tipping point for us right there. Okay. Debbie, do you have a question?
I did. I've been reading the chapter on the CBMs about all the curriculum-based
Yeah.
assessments and stuff. And I mean, is it okay if we come up with our own
Yeah.
and then give that same thing 6 times, correct?
Well, but so what I always do, you can use that, but tweak it up a little bit so they don't have the exact same one and they're able to memorize that.
Okay, so you
You
do want us to change it around a little bit.
change it around a little bit on that same level. You could even use the same one depending on what you are, but just if you got it on a Google
Just
Doc or
move it
something,
around a little bit.
yeah, you can go in there and move it around. That way they just
Okay.
don't recognize the same pattern. You can use the same problems on it, but just jumble it up.
Well, then I also thought I have some reading papers like that measure the words and everything.
Yeah.
And I thought about doing that because it would be more at her reading level because she is not on grade level.
Okay.
I do the weekly through FastBridge oral reading fluency, but those are grade 5 level readings, and she's not on a 5th grade level reading.
Started off on her actual reading level.
So I could do that and just use those ones I have.
You can, because
Now, if it's
remember,
reading, does it have to be the same reading?
no, you want to mix it up just a little bit.
Can it be
Change.
a different reading?
It could be a different reading passage that's very similar. So if it's taken
Oh,
the same story, let's say
it does
you
have to be close to the same story.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So let's say you have a story and you're going to pull these phrases out. So you
Okay.
can the first pro could be, the first two paragraphs, and then the second probe would be the third and fourth paragraph. It's all
Oh,
part of the story, but it's on the same readability level.
oh,
Maybe tracking her to track her reading fluency, number of
okay.
pronounced words if you're having her read orally to you and you're going through there and tracking them. You could use that as a probe and pull those phrases out of that story, and you're checking reading fluency.
Okay. But I could break it down. And so the first probe would be the first 2 paragraphs, the
Yeah.
second,
Yeah, and it's all the same story and it's all the same readability level.
and
It's all right
some
there.
of the same vocabulary too that
Same
we've already
vocabulary,
talked.
but it's not the same exact phrase. It's
Okay.
vocabs, very similar.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense.
Taken from that story, and so the vocab, a lot of the phrases in there have the same meaning,
Right.
same connotation, but it's not the exact same words over and over and over where she can memorize them or he can memorize them.
Okay.
Same thing when on the WJ, there's a phrase, a subtest on there where they have to read multiple phrases, and so if they get it, if they don't hit their ceiling, they just keep going up each time on their its readability level, and it gets increasingly more difficult. Give give your first two passages or probes to establish your base level. So if you give your first probe, let's say they score at a certain level, then you give the second probe similar and it drops,
Mhm.
chances are you probably need to drop the readability level of that down a little bit
Okay,
because your two to establish your baseline should show an upward trend when we
right,
graph. But if they score here and then all of a sudden it's your next two data points are going downward, that tells you that it's above their reading level.
okay,
Same thing if it's math. When you give the first couple probes to get the baseline, if their scores are decreasing the first couple times, hey, I need to stop. I need to change this up because we should see a continuous upward trend.
right,
Connect these data points. We're going to
okay,
connect to create a trend line. We want that trend line to go upward. If
right.
it's up and
I can't
down,
decide if I want to do reading or math. I can't. I
yeah,
can't decide. Okay. Nope, that gives me some good ideas of some things to think about for the curriculum based.
yeah, and again on those, you're giving them it takes 2 to 3 minutes. It doesn't take a long
Right.
tracking.
I mean, I could almost take a novel on her reading level and break that down, and that is her.
Yeah. Also, if you need some resources, I mentioned the website that's free, easycbm.com. That's another you can look at. You can pick out the different content area, grade level, and that'll give you some examples
Oh,
on there.
okay.
A good resource every semester. I have a lot of students use that as a resource, easycbm.com.
Okay.
Take a look at it, see, if it gives you some ideas.
And
And
I'm not very good at making graphs on the computer. Do you have a website that is the best place to? I used my Google last time.
so what
Is
I
that just as easy as any of them?
it is when I
Okay.
always go with street charts and graphs and all that, I do it using PowerPoint. And so
Okay.
PowerPoint, you can go in there and make charts and graphs, and it'll give you put your data in, and it will create the chart. So you select what type of visual you want. Do you want a bar graph? Do you want a pie
Right.
graph? Do you want a line graph? And then it's got a place you can click on it, and you put your data in and put your columns and your headings, and it will automatically make your graph. It will put the information in the graph for you. So that's what I always use. I'm used to it. I'm sure there's easier ways to do it.
Right.
I'm cool with that.
Okay.
All right.
That gives me some good ideas. Thank you.
Hey, you're welcome. Unless anyone has any questions, we'll go ahead and end tonight. Again, I will review some of the norm stuff, take your questions next week, and then we'll go ahead and kind of roll in and start talking a little bit about that CBM. Okay.
Okay.
But between now and then, when we meet, if you have questions, um, you have a mental block, just please email me. And if you're really struggling or getting frustrated with it, and we need to meet quick Zoom meeting 1-on-1, let me know and I'll do that too. So, okay.
Okay.
All right. You guys have
Okay.
a good evening and a good week.
Thank you. Good night.
You
Yeah.
guys, good night.